Hello friends, today we are going to discuss the research process. Uh, why is this particular topic important? Whenever you are conducting a research, you should know how to go about it. What are the various things that you have to do to be able to successfully complete this research? And that is what is going to be discussed today. We'll be discussing the research process and the various steps that constitute the research process. So what are the various steps in the research process? Number one is problem identification and formulation. Herein you identify the problem. What do we mean by the problem? The problem is the thing that you want to research, and it would emerge from the dilemma that your organization is facing. If your organization is facing some problem, they would want to resolve it. To be able to do that, they need to know why the problem has come up in the first place, and for this you will have to conduct a research. So that is the meaning of problem identification. Once you have identified the problem, you have to formulate it. What do we mean by formulation? You have to put it down. You have to put down the problem in very unambiguous manner, in very clear and concise manner. That is the meaning of problem formulation. So this is the first step. Now this step is followed by selection of research design. There are different types of research design. We'll be discussing each of them later on. As of now, you just need to keep in your mind that the second step is selection of research design. Once you have decided the research design, then you also decide the method of data collection. Please bear in your mind that the decision regarding the research design will in large measure determine the data collection tool that you will have to use. Once you have decided the data collection tool, you would move over to the next step, which is selecting the sampling procedure. Now, what do we mean by the sampling procedure? You understand that the research is not conducted with the whole population. We conduct the research with just a small sample, with just a small part of the population. But how do we decide who all would be part of our sample? How do we decide which all units to be picked up from the population as our sample, so that we can conduct our research? For this, you will have to use a sampling procedure, and that is what we are going to do in the fourth step. We are basically going to finalize the sampling procedure that we are going to use in our research. Now these four are the steps that basically relate to the planning part of the research. So you can understand that we are yet to start our research. We are basically still in the planning mode. We are basically still planning how to conduct the research, how to go about the research. In the next two steps, we would be basically implementing the plan. So the next two steps are the data collection as well as the data analysis. Here in what we are doing, we are basically implementing whatever we had planned in the first four steps. So these two steps, data collection and data analysis, basically refer to the implementation or the execution part of the research. So just as in management, in research methodology also, you start with a plan. The first four steps were basically the planning part of research, and the fifth and the sixth step basically refers to the execution part or the implementation part. Now once you have collected your data in the fifth step, and then you have analyzed it, and once you have analyzed this data, you certainly find something. There would be some findings, and based on that you would be recommending something. But then what should be the next step? The next step is basically report writing and presentation. Why do we need this step? Because you need to let others know as to what you have done. How have you conducted the research, and what you have found out? And to be able to do this, you need to write down every single thing that you have done, how you went about your research, what did you find, what was the analysis, what did you find, what are the recommendations. Everything has to be written down, and that is why the seventh step is writing down the report and also preparing the presentation. Now let us discuss all these steps in a little detail. The first step was problem identification and formulation. So before trying to understand what is problem identification and formulation, we need to understand why basically in organizations do we conduct research. See, what happens is organizations you know keep on coming across various problems. So once an organization is facing a problem, they certainly would want to resolve that problem, get out of that problem. But to be able to do that, they should know why in the first place the problem has come up. And how would they do this? They would assign some of their employees the task of conducting the research into this particular problem, so that they can get a hang of the problem, they can get a better understanding of the problem. So basically now you can understand that what particular research you are going to conduct will depend basically on the problem that the organization is facing. We will call it the management dilemma. So management dilemma is nothing but the problem that the organization is facing. Now this management dilemma will have to be transformed into the research question. The research question is the main question that we are trying to answer through our research, the focus of our research. Once we have decided the research question, which of course is based on the management dilemma, we will have to further divide this, we'll have to further break this research question into various research objectives. So this is going to be the next thing that you'll do. You will have to break down the research question into research objectives, but while doing this you have to keep in your mind that the research objectives, they should ideally be somewhere between 3 and 5. They should not be less than 3 and should not be more than 5 as well. Apart from that, they should neither be too broad nor should they be too narrowly defined. What do we mean by this? We'll take up one example and then we'll understand what we basically mean by this particular statement. The third thing is that these research objectives can also be stated in form of some hypothesis. So let us take an example to understand these terminologies. Okay, so what are the various management dilemma that an organization can face? This is the issue that the organization is facing. It could be that the attrition rates are increasing in the organization. You would recall from our discussion in human resource management what attrition is: people leaving a particular organization in search of a better opportunity somewhere else. That is what attrition is. Voluntary exits. Now if there is an increase in attrition rates, no company wants the attrition rates to be too high, and we have discussed the reasons behind this in our discussion in HRM, human resource management. So naturally now this becomes a big problem for the organization, a management dilemma. Another management dilemma from the production operations perspective can be that the proportion of defects has increased in our output. So in our company we are producing some item and we are seeing more and more numbers of defects, a more proportion of defective products being produced. Now this could be another problem for the organization. Another problem for the organization, another management dilemma could be when there is a decline in sales. So how do you arrest that decline? Because you would not want your sales to decline. Ultimately this is how you earn your revenues. So this could be another management dilemma. So all these could be different types of management dilemma, and there can be n number of management dilemma that an organization might face. Now this would lead to a research question being formulated. So just to keep the discussion simple, I would only be dealing with the first example that I've taken up, which is increase in attrition rate, and I'm trying to now transform this into research question. So I've transformed this into a research question. What are the reasons for increase in attrition rate among clerical staff in ABC Corporation? A hypothetical firm we have taken up, ABC Corporation, and what are the reasons that the attrition rates are increasing, and attrition rates for clerical employees have been increasing in this particular organization. Now this is my main focus, this is the focus of my research, the research question. Now I will further break it down into different research objectives, and here are these four research objectives. The first one is, what is the satisfaction level of clerical staff with the quality of supervision? Why have we taken up this particular research objective? Because we know that if a clerk is not satisfied with the quality of supervision. What do you mean by quality of supervision? How your boss behaves with you. Is he too tough a boss, or is he helpful? Does he help you out? Does he advise you, or does he only ask you to, or does he only keep assigning you a lot of work? So that is the meaning of the quality of supervision. So we know that the quality of supervision may have an impact on the motivation levels of the clerical staff, or for that matter on the motivation level of any employee, and the employees might want to exit if they have been working under a boss who is relatively too tough. So that has this understanding has given us this option of using this particular aspect as one of our research objectives. Now you also know that people might also want to leave if they feel that they're not being compensated well, if they feel that the compensation policies are not fair. That is what has led to the second research objective, which is finding out whether the clerical employees perceive companies' compensation policies as fair. Again, we also know that the attrition level may increase when the employees feel that they do not have good career growth prospects in the company in which they are working currently, and naturally they would, in this case, they would move over to exit this particular company, move over to switch over to some other company which offers them a better career growth opportunity. And that is why the third research objective that we have taken up is whether the clerical employees believe that company offers them adequate career growth opportunities. So now do you understand why we have taken up these three research objectives? But now please also understand that there can be n number of reasons why people are leaving a particular organization, they are exiting a particular organization, they are switching over from a particular organization. We have covered only the three aspects. So the remaining aspects are still uncovered, and that is why in our fourth research objective we are taking care of all the remaining aspects. And what is the fourth research objective? Have a look. The fourth research objective is, are there other reasons for the dissatisfaction among clerical employees, which is of course causing them to leave the organization and causing the attrition rate to increase. So what we basically have done is we have broken down our research question into four research objectives, and while doing this I had to bank on my knowledge of why people leave, why people attrite, which I probably might have gathered from various other research papers written by somebody else, research by somebody else, and written by somebody else. I've read those papers, and based on that, I can find out, I can understand that people leave just because they're dissatisfied with maybe the compensation policies or the career growth opportunities, or maybe with their boss, and that is why people leave. And that is this particular information, this background information has led me to break down the research question into these four research objectives. Okay, now let us understand what happens once the problem has been identified and formulated. Uh, you would recall from the last slide that we had also said that the research objectives can also be stated in form of hypothesis. Now, what is a hypothesis? That is something that we need to understand before we move on to the next step. Now, what is a hypothesis? Hypothesis, basically hypothesizing means making some kind of an informed guess. So what is a hypothesis? It's a conjectural statement about relationship between variables. What is a conjecture? Conjecture is some kind of a guess, but please bear in your mind that here when we are talking of hypothesis, these are not just, you know, gut feeling guesses. These are informed guesses. So hypothesis is not just about guesses, it's about making these guesses based on some prior knowledge or based on some experience that you already have. So these are all informed guesses. And what are we trying to guess? We are trying to guess the relationship between the two variables, or maybe more than two variables. Now if you look at the last example, attrition rate could be increasing because the clerical level employees, they're not satisfied with their boss. Now I'm just guessing this based on my understanding of why people are dissatisfied in an organization. So I'm just guessing it. But again, please try and understand that this guess is based on some information that I've already collected, some other research papers which say that if people are dissatisfied with the quality of supervision, they might leave. So this is an informed guess, and I'm trying to guess the relationship between the two variables, and I'm guessing that maybe people are leaving because they're not satisfied with their boss or satisfied with the quality of supervision. So hypothesis is basically some kind of a conjecture, it's some kind of an assumption, but yes, it is based on some information that you already have. It could also be said to be a proposed explanation of a phenomena. So here we are trying to explain the phenomena, why people are leaving, why attrition rates are increasing, and we are proposing, the explanation that we are proposing is that people might be leaving just because they are not satisfied with the quality of supervision. But then what do we do with the hypothesis? It's just a guess. So we have to see whether this guess that we have made, or whether this assumption is actually valid or not. For that, we'll have to conduct the research. And based on the research, we conclude whether the hypothesis, the assumption that we are making, the informed guess that we are making, was that hypothesis valid? Does that hypothesis hold true, or does that hypothesis does that hypothesis not hold true? So this we will conclude based on our research. Now let us look at the different types of hypotheses which are there. There are two main types of hypotheses. The first one is called the null hypothesis, which is denoted by h naught. It's basically at zero, but then we use the term h naught. Now h naught is the null hypothesis, and it is the hypothesis which is tested through research. Now this is very important. This is the hypothesis that is actually tested through research. If you look at the third point above, we have said that hypothesis is tested through research. Which hypothesis is tested through research? The null hypothesis. And once it is tested through research, based on whatever you have found out, you either accept that hypothesis, you conclude that your hypothesis, the assumption that you made was actually true, or you reject it, you conclude that it was not valid. So this is the first type of hypothesis, null hypothesis. Then we have the second type of hypothesis, which is called the alternate hypothesis. Now what is the meaning of the word alternate? Alternate means the other. So naturally, the other hypothesis that we have, which we denote by h1, is the exact opposite of h naught, or the null hypothesis, and it is not tested. This is very important. You need to understand that this hypothesis is not tested. It is accepted if h naught, which is the null hypothesis, is rejected. And it makes sense also. See, alternate hypothesis is the opposite of null hypothesis. If null hypothesis is not true, the opposite, which is alternate hypothesis, has got to be true. So this is what we do in the research. We only test the null hypothesis. If we find it to be true, we accept it. If we don't find it to be true, we reject it, and automatically then we will accept the alternate hypothesis. Now let us take an example. We have said in the last slide that research objectives can also be stated in form of research hypothesis. So let us see if we can do that. For the first objective which was there, the first objective was to find out whether clerical employees are satisfied with the quality of supervision or not. So we have tried to convert it into a hypothesis now, and the null hypothesis now comes out to be clerical staff is satisfied with the quality of supervision. So this is the null hypothesis, and basically what we've done, we have actually transformed the research objective number 1, which was there in the last slide. We have basically transformed it into a hypothesis now. The null hypothesis now becomes clerical staff is satisfied. Now what would be the alternate hypothesis? The exact opposite, and that is why the alternate hypothesis becomes the clerical staff is not satisfied with the quality of supervision. So this is how we can transform our research objectives. There's absolutely no need that you only state research objectives or you only go by research objectives. You can always, instead of research objectives, you can always have research hypothesis. Before we move ahead, I would want you to bear in your mind that hypothesis, actually there are two different spellings. One, as I've written here, hypothesis. The other one would be hypotheses. There's a difference between the two. One is the singular form, the other one is the plural form. Now the task for you is to refer to some dictionary and find out which one is singular and which one is plural. Okay, so now let us move ahead. We have had a discussion on the first step in the research process. Now we are moving ahead. So let us talk about the research design now. If you would recall that the second step was to finalize the research design. Now what basically is the research design? Research design is nothing but it is a blueprint. It's a plan. And this plan talks about how you are going to conduct your research. So it's a blueprint for collection, measurement and analysis of data. So research design is a blueprint, it's a plan. And in this plan, we decide beforehand, before conducting the research, as to how we are going to collect the data, how we are going to measure it, how we are going to analyze the data, what all tools are we going to utilize to collect the data, and what all statistical techniques we are going to employ to analyze the data. So this is finalized beforehand. Before conducting the research, you finalize the research design, and research design gives you the full plan of how you are going to go about conducting your research. So it's a plan to be followed to answer the research questions. So we have to answer the research questions, we have to somehow meet the research objectives that we have decided for ourselves, and that is why we need a research design which will give us a plan which we'll have to follow so that we can answer the research questions. Now, what is the use of research design? Research design basically helps you decide, number one, the data collection method that you are going to employ. Number two, the sampling design that you are going to utilize. So basically research design helps in these two things. First is, based on whatever your research design is, and I'm saying this again, I touched upon this point when we were discussing the various steps in the research process. So based on research design only, you decide the data collection method that you are going to use, and based on research design also, you also decide which sampling approach you are going to utilize in your research. What are the major types of research designs? The major types are exploratory, descriptive and causal. RD here means research design, so it's an abbreviation for research design: exploratory research design, descriptive and causal research design. We'll be discussing them in more detail in the next video lecture. Now let us move over to the third step, which is choice of method of data collection. Now we have said that ultimately the method of data collection will mostly depend on the research design that you have chosen for your research, and that is what has been written here as well. It depends on the research design. So depending on the research design, you will have to go for a particular method of data collection. What are the major types of data collection tools that we have, data collection methods that we have? Surveys, observations and experiments. Now please understand that these are the major types. There are other types also, but most of the time we employ one of these, so that is why we are going to discuss them here. Now let us understand what is the difference between them: surveys, observations and experiments. Now survey is an activity wherein researcher is interacting with the respondents to obtain facts, opinions, and attitudes. Now, let me, before trying to make you understand what survey is, I'll make you understand what do we mean by facts and how is it different from opinion. See, fact is something that is a universal truth. It is true for me, it is true for you, it is true for some fellow friend of yours, it is true for parents also. So it is a universal truth. That is what we call a fact. The capital of India is Delhi. It's a universal truth. It's a universal truth for me also, for you also, for your friends also. So that is what is fact. What is a fact? Now, what is an opinion? Opinion is more subjective and it depends on an individual. One individual's opinion on a particular matter may be very, very different from somebody else's opinion on that very matter. For example, should we ban mobile phones in the classroom? Now, you may have a different opinion, I may have a different opinion, your brothers or sisters may have an entirely different opinion. So, opinion is something that is held by an individual, and it is very, very specific to that individual. No two people can have the same opinion, while fact is a universal truth. So that is the difference between facts and opinion. So a researcher might want to find out from the respondent. Respondent is the person who is responding to the questions which have been put up by the researcher, and that is why he is called a respondent. So as a researcher, I might want to find out from a respondent as to how much does he earn in a particular year. This is a fact. If he's earning, let's say, 20,000 in a particular month, that is a fact. So I might want to find that out. That is a fact. And if I ask him for his opinion regarding whether mobile phone should be banned in the class or not, that becomes a collection of opinion. We are trying to collect his opinion on this particular issue. Fine. I can also ask him how does he rate Patanjali on its organic qualities. Patanjali FMCG, the firm, FMCG firm, on its organic qualities. Now, uh, if I'm asking this question, how do you rate Patanjali organic, as a company which produces organic products? Now, he will give me his rating based on what his attitude towards Patanjali is. Is this okay? So this is how we try to gather facts, opinions, and attitudes from our respondent in a research uh, conducted through survey method. So what is a survey? Survey is, let me reiterate, survey is an activity in which the researcher is interacting. So please understand, what do we mean by interaction? Interaction means there is a two-way communication between the researcher and the person from whom the questions to whom the questions are being put up, the researcher and the respondent. So there's a two-way interaction, so both are communicating with each other. And then we had also seen that the data collection methods depend a lot on the research design, and the same thing has been stated here, that surveys are used in descriptive and exploratory research designs. Now let us have a look at the observations. What do we mean by observation? Now please note the difference. In surveys, the researcher was interacting, so there was a two-way communication between the researcher and the person from whom the responses are being taken, from whom we are seeking some responses, or the respondent. So there was a two interaction. While in observation, there is only and only monitoring. There is no interaction between the researcher and the person or the entity or the event which is being observed. Here I have used the word respondent. Generally in observation, we replace the word respondent by subject. So the person on whom you are conducting the research, or the person whom you are observing, is not going to be a respondent. You will have to call him your subject, because he's why, and the reason behind that is the subject, the respondent, responds, while here there is no communication. The researcher is only observing. The subject. The subject is not giving any response, and that is why the subject would not be called, should not be called, ideally he should not be called a respondent. So though I have used the word respondent here, the better word which should have been used here is subject. So what happens in observation? The researcher only monitors the respondents or the subjects actions. So there is no interaction between the two. This is the major difference between surveys and observation. In survey there is an interaction between the two, researcher and the respondent, while in observation the researcher only and only monitors the respondent, or a better word would be the subject. Again, observations are generally used for descriptive and exploratory researches, used in descriptive and exploratory research designs. Now let us talk about the third major data collection method, which is experiments. And experiments are basically used to investigate causality, cause-effect relationship. I'll give you an example. Suppose I'm saying that if I increase the salary of a particular employee, his chances of quitting the organization will reduce. So increase in salary will affect a reduction in the attrition rates. So increase in salary is the cause, and reduction in attrition rates is the effect. So this is the cause effect relationship, and if we are trying to investigate this, we generally use experiments, and experiments generally go with the causal research designs. So in causal research designs you have to use experiments. Through experiments you can basically find out the cause effect relationship. Now that we have completed this choice of method of data collection, which if you recall was the third step in the research process, let's move over to the fourth step, which is the sampling procedure. Now you have to also decide the sampling procedure that you are going to employ to collect a sample from the population. Before trying to understand what are different types of sampling procedure, we need to understand what a sample is. Sample is a subset of population contacted for data collection. Let's take an example. You must have, and we have discussed this in class also, there are exit polls wherein the various research firms and the various media agencies try to predict which party is going to win the election by just talking to a few of the voters. So how does it happen? You must have seen that in the year 2019 general elections took place for Lok Sabha, and almost 65 to 70 crore people in India voted. But these research agencies did not talk to all these 60-70 crore people. They only talked to maybe around 4,000 5,000 voters, and based on that they concluded how the 60-70 crore population has voted and which particular party is going to win the election. So here the 4,000 5,000 people that we have spoken to and from whom we have obtained the responses, they are our sample, while the 65-70 crore people who have voted, they are the population, and we are collecting data only from the sample, only from these 4,000 5,000 people, and we are making predictions for the whole 65-70 crore people who have voted in the elections. So we are making predictions for the whole population. So sample is basically used to make predictions for the population. But then to be able to do this, you have to decide how do you pick up these 4,000 5,000 people out of 65-70 crore people. For this we have got different approaches. There are two major approaches that we are going to use. One is called the probability sampling and the other one is called the non-probability sampling. We'll be discussing them in detail um, in this very unit. So as of now, you just need to understand that probability sampling is basically of four types, while non-probability sampling again is basically of four types. Probability sampling, simple random sampling, we have systematic sampling, stratified sampling, cluster sampling. While non-probability sampling, we have got quota, convenience, judgment, and snowball sampling. We'll be discussing them in more detail later on. Now, the first four steps in the research process we have been able to complete. Now, we need to understand that the remaining two steps, there is not much to discuss. The data collection, the data analysis, we'll be discussing data analysis later on in unit number 4 also. What you right now right now need to understand is that there are 7 steps, out of which I've given you a brief idea of the first 4 steps, which are basically part of the research planning process. So my advice to you would be that you please go through the video lecture well. If you are not able to understand a particular point, you can pause the video there and have a look at that particular slide again, so that you better understand the concepts, you understand the concepts better. If you still come across some problems, you can always discuss it with your fellow batchmates. If the problem still persists, you can always give me a call. um, Kindly also keep taking down notes, because you need to retain this information till your exams as well. So that is all in this particular video lecture. Very soon I'll be posting another video lecture wherein we'll be talking about the research design in much more detail. Thank you very much.